He had always been curious about the old piano that sat quietly in the corner of the living room. Dust had settled thickly on its black and white keys, and the varnish on its wooden body had started to fade in places. Everyone in the house treated it like a relic, something to look at but never touch. "Don't touch it," they often said, shaking their heads. "It's too old. It might break." Or sometimes they warned, "It has been here for decades. It's better left alone." Despite the warnings, he felt drawn to it in a way that was hard to describe. Every time he walked past, a strange pull made him glance down at the keys, imagining the sounds they might make. He wasn't sure where the fascination had started. Maybe it was the way the sunlight caught the dust on the keys in the mornings, turning them into tiny shining squares. Maybe it was the faint smell of aged wood that seemed to whisper secrets when he leaned close. Or maybe it was the memories of the people who had once played it, leaving a little part of themselves behind. Whatever the reason, the piano called to him, and every day he felt the pull stronger. One afternoon, when the house was quiet and the usual voices of warning had faded into soft murmurs in other rooms, he found himself standing in front of it again. His hands itched to touch the keys, to feel the smoothness under his fingers and hear the first note. He hesitated, remembering the words he had heard countless times. But the curiosity that had been growing inside him for months became impossible to ignore. He reached out slowly, hovering over the keys as if testing the waters of something unknown. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, he flinched. The keys were cold under his touch, and for a second, he thought he heard a faint hum, like the piano itself was waking from a long sleep. He pulled back, heart pounding, and reminded himself of the warnings. He shouldn't be doing this. But the sound of the hum, or maybe it was just his imagination, kept him rooted to the spot. He couldn't look away. Something inside him told him that this moment was important, that something extraordinary might be waiting if he dared to go further. Days passed, and he found excuses to linger near the piano whenever the house was empty. He would sit nearby, pretending to read, while his eyes never left the keys. Each time he tried to convince himself to step away, the pull would return, stronger than before. He began to imagine melodies, soft tunes that could fill the room, even though he had never learned to play properly. The piano became more than just an object. It became a companion, a mysterious friend that whispered possibilities he had never known. One evening, he found himself alone in the living room with the sun setting behind the curtains. The room was bathed in a warm, golden light, and the piano seemed to glow as if it were aware of his presence. He sat on the edge of the bench, fingers trembling slightly. The first note he played was uncertain, almost hesitant, a quiet C that hung in the air and seemed to linger longer than it should. He held his breath, expecting something to go wrong, expecting a harsh sound or the creak of the old instrument. Instead, the notes sounded clear and pure, echoing gently in the room. He tried another note, then another, each one building slowly, clumsily into a simple sequence. He didn't know any songs, didn't follow any rules. Yet something inside him responded to the keys, a rhythm that felt natural and right. The sounds filled the room, not loud or boastful, but soft and honest. He felt a warmth spread through him, a thrill that came from creating something that had never existed before. Even though it was small and imperfect, it was his. It belonged to him and no one else. His heart raced as he continued to experiment. Sometimes the notes clashed, sharp and awkward, and he would pause, frustrated. But then, unexpectedly, the next combination of keys would produce a harmony that surprised him. He realized that there was more to this instrument than the warnings had suggested. The piano was not fragile in the way they had said. It was alive with possibilities, waiting for someone brave enough to touch it. Hours passed without him noticing. The room grew darker as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the shadows stretched long across the floor. The notes from the piano created an invisible thread, tying him to the present and to something deeper. For the first time, he felt truly awake, as though a door had opened inside him that he didn't even know existed. Each sound was a spark, igniting a sense of wonder that filled every corner of the room. He didn't stop when the house grew quiet at night. Instead, he stayed, letting his fingers explore patterns and sequences, sometimes simple, sometimes complicated, often just experimenting with the sounds. The warnings of the past felt distant now, replaced by a growing understanding. The piano wasn't dangerous. It wasn't forbidden. It was a challenge, a mystery, a chance to touch something magical, if only he had the courage. He began to notice small details he had never seen before. The way the ivory keys reflected the dim light, the soft creak of the bench as he adjusted his posture, the faint hum of strings beneath the surface that vibrated with each touch. He became aware that the piano had its own language, one that could be understood if he listened carefully. Each note had a weight, a tone, a purpose, and as he listened and played, he felt a connection, a dialogue forming between him and the instrument. Sometimes, he imagined the people who had played it before him, their hands moving over the keys, leaving behind traces of emotion and memory. He felt a sense of continuity, as if he were stepping into a story that had been paused long ago, waiting for him to continue. It was thrilling and humbling all at once. The piano had been silent for years, and now it responded to him not as a machine, but as a partner in creation. There were moments when doubt crept in. What if he ruined it? What if he was just imagining the music? What if he wasn't really talented? But every time he hesitated, a single note would emerge, clear and beautiful, reminding him that he was capable, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The piano rewarded courage, even when the hands were inexperienced. By the end of that first week of secret practice, he had begun to understand something profound. Touching the piano was not merely about making sound. It was about discovery, about patience, about trusting oneself even when others had said it was forbidden. Each day, the music became a little stronger, a little more confident, and he began to see that he was not just playing notes. He was creating something entirely new, something personal, something magical. And though he had not yet shared it with anyone, he knew the moment would come when others would hear. They would see that the warnings were unnecessary, that the fear had been replaced by a gift. And deep inside, he felt a quiet joy, knowing that he had taken the first step into a world that many never dared to explore. The piano, once untouchable and mysterious, had opened its doors to him, and he had stepped in, ready to uncover the magic that lived within his own hands. The day he decided to really try was quiet and still. The house felt empty, almost as if it were waiting for him. He walked to the piano slowly, his fingers itching to touch the keys again. Unlike the first time, he didn't hover. He sat down, took a deep breath, and placed his hands on the worn surface. The keys felt familiar now, cold yet welcoming. He didn't know what he would play. He didn't know if he would play anything at all. All he knew was that he had to try. The first notes were awkward. His fingers stumbled over the keys, producing clumsy, uneven sounds. There were moments when he pressed two keys at once by mistake, or missed a key entirely, letting the silence hang in the air. At first, he felt frustrated, wanting to give up and step away, remembering the voices that had warned him. But then he remembered the small spark of wonder from his first touch. He had felt something then, and he wanted to feel it again. Slowly, he began to notice patterns. One note led naturally to another. He experimented with small sequences, pressing keys in different orders and listening to the way they blended. Some combinations sounded harsh or wrong, but others surprised him with a soft, gentle harmony that made his heart lift. Each small success gave him confidence, and the awkwardness of his mistakes became part of the learning process. He realized that mistakes were not the end. They were steps toward understanding the instrument. As he played, he became aware of the sound filling the room. It was not loud, not impressive in the way a trained musician's performance might be, but it carried a presence that made the space feel alive. He imagined someone walking into the room and being pulled by the music, feeling the same wonder he felt. The piano was no longer just a dusty old object. It was a voice, and he was beginning to find his way into speaking through it. The first piece he managed to create was simple, almost childish in its structure. It was a series of ascending notes that moved slowly, rising and falling, like a story told in sound. He repeated it over and over, making small changes each time, adding a little pause here, a slight change in rhythm there. It felt personal, as if he were telling a story that only he could tell. The piano became an extension of his thoughts and emotions, a way to communicate without words. Hours passed quickly. He lost track of time, fully absorbed in the music. Sometimes he would pause, lift his hands, and listen to the notes lingering in the air. It felt magical to him. The piano had accepted him, allowed him to make mistakes, and yet rewarded his curiosity with sounds he had never imagined. It was a strange and wonderful feeling, knowing that something so ordinary could be so extraordinary when touched with patience and care. He began to explore more daring combinations, pressing keys in ways that felt risky. Some produced jarring sounds, but others revealed hidden beauty. He discovered that his fingers could move in ways that surprised even him, forming patterns that felt natural and right. The piano seemed to respond to his touch, almost guiding him toward melodies he hadn't consciously planned. He felt a connection growing, a silent understanding between him and the instrument. At times, he closed his eyes and let his fingers wander, trusting them to find the right notes. When he did, the sound was effortless and pure, as if it had always existed and he was merely uncovering it. Other times he struggled, hitting wrong keys, tripping over chords, and feeling a wave of frustration. But even in those moments, he noticed that the piano did not punish him. It accepted every attempt, every mistake, every experiment. It gave him the freedom to explore, to discover, to create. By the end of the day, he had played many short sequences, each with its own character and feeling. Some were soft and tender, almost like a whisper. Others were bold, loud, and confident. He noticed that each sequence evoked a different emotion, not just in him, but in the room itself. The air seemed charged with the vibrations, and he could almost sense the piano smiling back at him. It was as though he had found a new friend, a companion that understood him in a way no one else could. He paused often to rest his hands, rubbing the stiffness out of his fingers, but he always returned. The piano had become more than a curiosity. It had become a place of comfort, a refuge from the outside world. He found himself talking to it sometimes, whispering encouragement or apologizing for a clumsy note. It felt alive in a way that was hard to explain, and he realized that this was the start of something important. Sometimes he thought about what others had said. "Don't touch it," they had warned. But he realized that the warnings were not meant to scare him. They were cautionary, rooted in concern. Still, the fear that had once held him back was replaced by excitement. He was no longer intimidated by the piano. He was inspired by it. He began to understand that the magic lay not in the instrument itself, but in the willingness to explore and take risks. He also noticed changes in himself. His patience had grown, his attention to detail sharpened. He listened more carefully, not just to the notes he played, but to the space between them. He discovered that silence could be as powerful as sound, that pauses could create tension and release in a melody. He felt more present, more aware of the world around him, and more attuned to the subtle emotions that music could express. Some evenings, he would sit quietly after playing, letting the notes echo in his mind. He felt a sense of accomplishment but also humility. The piano had taught him that creating beauty was not about perfection. It was about honesty, about expressing what was inside. He had begun to see that the instrument was a mirror, reflecting his feelings, his mistakes, and his discoveries back to him. Every time he played, he learned something new, not just about music but about himself. He began to experiment with rhythms, trying to create patterns that felt alive and moving. He tapped out beats with one hand while holding melodies with the other, discovering combinations that made him smile with surprise. The piano seemed to encourage him, responding to his courage and curiosity with sounds that were more beautiful than he had imagined possible. Each small success fueled him to try more, to push the boundaries of what he thought he could do. By the time the sun set and the room was filled with the soft glow of evening, he felt a sense of satisfaction that was both deep and lasting. He had not only touched the piano but had begun to understand it, to communicate with it. He had taken the first real step into the world of creation, and it felt like stepping into a larger, brighter space where anything might be possible. As he left the piano that night, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. His fingers were sore, but his heart was light. He knew he would return, that this was only the beginning. The piano had become a secret companion, a source of discovery, and a channel for something he had never been able to express before. And though no one else had heard him yet, he felt certain that, one day, the music would reach beyond the walls of the room, touching others with the same wonder and magic that had captured him. As the days passed, he spent more and more time with the piano. Each session brought new surprises, and the awkward, clumsy notes of the beginning had slowly given way to small sequences that sounded intentional and beautiful. He still did not know how to read music or play properly, but he discovered that his fingers seemed to know what to do when he simply let them explore. The piano had become a teacher, guiding him through trial and error, showing him patterns that pleased his ears and felt right under his touch. One afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the window, he began experimenting with chords, pressing multiple keys at once to see how the sounds would blend. The first few attempts were rough, producing harsh tones that made him wince. But then, almost accidentally, he struck a combination of notes that seemed to resonate perfectly. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to hear what he had just created. He repeated the sequence, making small adjustments, and discovered that he could manipulate the notes to create different emotions. Some chords felt bright and cheerful, others soft and melancholic. He realized that the piano allowed him to express feelings he had never been able to put into words. Word of his secret sessions had not spread yet. No one else had seen him play, but he felt a growing sense of responsibility toward the instrument. It was no longer just a toy or a curiosity. It was a living, breathing part of his life, and he wanted to honor it. He began setting small goals for himself, like learning to connect sequences of notes in a smooth way, or creating a short melody that could evoke a certain feeling. Each goal brought a sense of achievement, and the sense of magic he felt every time he played only grew stronger. One evening, his concentration was interrupted by a small noise outside the door. He froze, listening, heart pounding. No one came in, but the moment reminded him that his secret was fragile. Still, he continued to play, letting his fingers wander over the keys, exploring textures and rhythms that seemed to come from deep within him. By now, he had begun to feel that the music was not just something he produced, but something that existed already, waiting for him to find it. His role was not to create from nothing but to uncover what was hidden in the space between the keys. He began to notice the changes in himself. Patience came more easily, as he would sit for hours working out a difficult transition between notes. He also grew more aware of subtle emotions, recognizing that small shifts in tone or tempo could dramatically change the mood of a melody. He found that the piano demanded attention, but in return, it taught him to listen to himself, to the sounds, and to the world around him. Even in silence, he could hear music, and that made him feel more alive. Occasionally, he imagined performing in front of someone, though the thought was frightening. He pictured his family entering the room, skeptical and unsure of what they would hear. What if they laughed? What if they said he was wasting his time? But then he imagined their faces changing, their eyes widening as they listened, and he felt a thrill of anticipation. He wanted to share this part of himself, even if only a little at first. He knew that the piano had unlocked something that could not remain hidden forever. With each session, he experimented with dynamics, learning how soft notes could speak with tenderness, and how louder sequences could command attention. He explored rhythm as well, tapping and pausing to see how the timing affected the feel of the music. Sometimes, he would get lost in the motion, letting his fingers move instinctively while he closed his eyes. When he opened them, he often found that a melody had formed, one that he had not consciously planned. The piano seemed to have a mind of its own, guiding his hands and suggesting directions that he could never have imagined on his own. He also became aware of the physicality of playing. His fingers grew stronger, more flexible, and more precise. He learned to control the weight of each touch, to press lightly or firmly depending on the effect he wanted. Every movement became deliberate, even when it was instinctual. He realized that creating music required both thought and feeling, coordination and intuition. The piano demanded all of him, and he was happy to give it. Occasionally, he would stop and reflect on the journey so far. He remembered the first hesitant touch, the clumsy mistakes, the thrill of discovering a note that felt right. He felt a sense of pride, not in a boastful way, but in the quiet satisfaction of progress. Every small achievement mattered, and every mistake had taught him something. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a mirror of his own growth, a reflection of his patience, curiosity, and courage. As he became more confident, he began to combine what he had learned into short compositions. Each piece told a story, not with words but with notes, rhythms, and pauses. Some pieces were playful, almost like laughter captured in sound. Others were reflective, carrying the weight of a thought or feeling that lingered long after the last note. He realized that music could communicate in ways that language could not. It was intimate, universal, and deeply personal all at once. During these explorations, he sometimes wondered why no one else had noticed the potential of the piano. It had sat in the corner for decades, overlooked and ignored, until he had dared to touch it. Now, the music he produced seemed to fill the room in a way that demanded attention, even when no one else was present. He began to understand that hidden treasures could exist in ordinary places, waiting for the right person to uncover them. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by unexpectedly. She had come to drop off a small package, and when she opened the door, she heard the music flowing from inside. She paused, listening quietly, captivated by the sound. He froze, unsure what to do, but she smiled softly and said nothing, simply allowing the music to continue. When the last note faded, she applauded gently. That moment was transformative. He realized that his private exploration could touch others as well. The piano was no longer just for him. It could share its magic with the world. This small validation encouraged him to continue and experiment further. He tried combining contrasting emotions within a single piece, creating sequences that moved from joy to sadness, from calm to tension, and back again. Each new experiment brought a deeper understanding of how music could convey the nuances of human experience. He felt as though he were learning a secret language, one that existed beyond words and gestures, one that could reach the hearts of anyone who listened. He also began to record his sessions in small ways, writing down the sequences he liked most. He didn't understand traditional music notation, but he developed his own system of symbols and marks to remember patterns and rhythms. This allowed him to revisit ideas and improve upon them. The process of recording and refining gave him a sense of purpose, a feeling that he was building something lasting, even if it existed only in his own hands and mind. By now, the piano had become an inseparable part of his life. It was there when he woke up, waiting patiently in the corner. It was there in the evenings, offering comfort and challenge in equal measure. It had become a friend, a confidant, and a guide. He understood that his journey was far from over, but he also felt a quiet certainty that he was on the right path. The music he created was his own, yet it connected him to something larger than himself, something timeless and universal. As he closed the piano for the night, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. His fingers were sore from hours of practice, but his mind buzzed with ideas and possibilities. He knew that he had discovered not just talent, but a form of expression that could carry him far beyond the walls of the living room. The magic of the piano was no longer a mystery. It was alive in his hands, and he was ready to explore it fully, one note at a time. By the time the next week arrived, he felt a confidence he had never known before. The piano no longer seemed like a foreign object. It felt like an extension of himself. His fingers moved with precision, but more importantly, with feeling. Every note carried intention, and every pause had meaning. He experimented with emotion, letting joy, sadness, curiosity, and excitement flow through his playing. Each session felt like a conversation between him and the instrument, a dialogue that needed no words to be understood. One afternoon, he decided to play for the family, who were gathered in the living room. His heart thumped with nervous anticipation, a mixture of fear and excitement. He took a deep breath and placed his hands on the keys. The first few notes were soft and uncertain, but as he continued, something remarkable happened. The music began to flow naturally, moving with a rhythm and melody that seemed to come from a place beyond thought. His fingers danced across the keys effortlessly, producing sequences that were both beautiful and unexpected. His family fell silent, mesmerized by the sound. The warnings they had given him before, the skepticism, the doubt, they all seemed to vanish in that moment. The music was alive, touching something deep inside them. Some felt a lump in their throat, others closed their eyes to soak in the melodies. They had never expected this. They had warned him not to touch it, thinking nothing could come of it. And yet, here he was, transforming a dusty old piano into a source of wonder. Encouraged by their reaction, he began to explore more daring compositions. He combined contrasting emotions in a single piece, moving seamlessly from playful, light-hearted notes to deep, reflective melodies. The room seemed to respond to him, filling with a warmth that was both physical and emotional. Each chord, each pause, each carefully chosen note seemed to carry a life of its own. He felt a thrill, realizing that music had the power to reach beyond words, to communicate in a way that could touch hearts and stir emotions. Word of his talent began to spread quietly in small ways. Neighbors and friends who happened to hear snippets of his music through open windows or doors were drawn to it. Some stopped to listen, amazed at the skill and the feeling conveyed. He began to see that music could connect people, even strangers, through shared emotion. He was no longer playing in isolation. He was creating an experience that others could feel, a magic that transcended barriers. One evening, he decided to try something completely new. He closed his eyes and let his imagination guide his fingers. Instead of focusing on structure or perfection, he allowed the notes to flow naturally, creating melodies that were unpredictable yet harmonious. The result was a sequence of music that felt alive, almost as if it had its own consciousness. He felt exhilarated and terrified at the same time. He knew that this was a breakthrough, a moment where his playing had reached a level of expression he had not thought possible. The piano responded beautifully, as though acknowledging his daring. The resonance of the notes filled every corner of the room, carrying with it an invisible energy. He played for hours, losing track of time, completely absorbed in the music. His emotions poured into the keys, and in return, he received a feedback of sound that reflected his own spirit back to him. It was a cycle of creation and response, intimate and profound. His family watched quietly, respecting the intensity of the moment. They had never seen him like this before. The shy, tentative person who had hesitated to touch the piano was gone. In his place was someone fully immersed, confident, and alive. They realized that the warnings had been unnecessary, born of caution rather than understanding. The piano had not broken. It had revealed something extraordinary. The next day, he invited a few friends over. At first, he was nervous, unsure if his music would impress or if it would be misunderstood. But as his fingers touched the keys, all doubt melted away. The melodies were expressive, filled with subtle nuances that conveyed emotion with clarity. His friends were captivated. They listened in silence, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, each person experiencing the music in their own way. The magic was undeniable. It was no longer just notes. It was an experience, a journey. Encouraged by their reaction, he began experimenting with improvisation. Instead of playing pieces he had practiced, he allowed the moment to guide him. His fingers responded instinctively to his emotions, weaving melodies that could not be predicted. Each improvisation was unique, carrying with it the feeling of that precise moment in time. The piano became not just a tool but a partner, capable of surprising even him with its responsiveness. As the days went on, he began to notice that the music affected him as much as it affected others. Playing became a form of meditation, a way to process thoughts and emotions. Joy, sadness, excitement, and reflection all found expression in his playing. He felt lighter, more connected, and more at peace. The piano had become a refuge, a place where he could explore the full range of human emotion and come out feeling enriched. One afternoon, he experienced a moment of pure inspiration. He had been experimenting with a particularly difficult combination of notes, a sequence that required both speed and delicacy. At first, he struggled, hitting wrong keys, tripping over rhythms, and feeling frustrated. But then, in a sudden flash, everything clicked. His fingers moved fluidly, effortlessly, producing a melody that was both intricate and harmonious. The room seemed to vibrate with the sound, as though acknowledging the perfection of that brief moment. He felt a surge of exhilaration and joy, realizing that he had just created something extraordinary. The experience left him invigorated. He realized that music had the power not only to express emotion but to transform it. Each note could carry meaning. Each pause could speak volumes. He began to see that his piano could touch lives in ways that words often could not. The realization filled him with purpose. He wanted to share this gift, to let others experience the magic he had discovered, to show that something so simple as pressing keys on an old piano could create something truly remarkable. Encouraged by these discoveries, he began composing more complex pieces. He experimented with tempo, dynamics, and rhythm, exploring how changes in timing could alter the emotional impact. He incorporated pauses that created tension and release, soft notes that felt like whispers, and strong chords that demanded attention. Every piece became a story, a narrative told entirely through sound. He understood that the piano could communicate what language could not, and he felt a profound sense of responsibility to convey each story with honesty and care. He also began teaching himself more formal techniques, watching videos and reading books to understand music theory. Yet, he never let rules stifle his creativity. Instead, he used them as tools to enhance his natural intuition. The combination of instinct and knowledge allowed him to push boundaries, creating melodies that were both technically skilled and emotionally compelling. He realized that true magic lay in balancing skill with expression, in letting the heart guide the hands while the mind provided structure. One evening, after a long day of playing, he stepped back from the piano and simply listened to the echoes of the notes lingering in the room. He felt a sense of completion, as though he had touched something eternal. The piano, once forbidden and dusty, had become a source of life, inspiration, and connection. It had taught him patience, courage, and the power of expression. Most importantly, it had revealed a part of himself that he had never known existed. He realized that his journey was just beginning. The piano had shown him the potential of what could be created, and he was eager to explore even further. The magic was not in the instrument alone, but in the willingness to trust, to experiment, and to express. He had learned that beauty often comes from courage, and that the things we are told not to touch may hold the greatest rewards. The piano had become a symbol of possibility, and he was ready to continue discovering the magic within and beyond it. Time passed, and his relationship with the piano deepened more with each day. What had started as curiosity had transformed into mastery, though not in the sense of technical perfection, but in understanding and connection. The piano had become a mirror, reflecting not only his emotions but also the emotions of those who listened. Every note carried a part of him, and every melody told a story that words could not capture. He began performing for friends and family more regularly, and each time the reactions reaffirmed what he had started to believe. Music could reach people in ways nothing else could. Tears, laughter, quiet reflection. He had seen all these reactions to his playing, and each one strengthened his confidence. The piano was no longer just an object or a pastime. It was a bridge connecting him to others, a way to communicate feelings and stories that had no other outlet. Encouraged by this, he started exploring new forms of expression. He experimented with blending genres, combining soft classical passages with playful, rhythmic improvisations. He explored silence as much as sound, learning how pauses could carry tension, expectation, or relief. The piano responded willingly, as if it recognized his growing maturity and understanding. Each session was an adventure, revealing new possibilities and insights into the power of music. He also began writing small compositions, keeping notebooks of melodies, rhythms, and ideas. They were personal and raw, often reflecting his moods or experiences of the day. He noticed that even when he revisited an old piece, he could approach it differently, adding nuances and layers that reflected his evolving perspective. Music had become a living record of his inner life, a diary of sound that captured moments of joy, confusion, excitement, and introspection. One evening, he decided to share his music outside of his usual circle. He set up a small gathering in the living room, inviting neighbors and a few friends. When the first notes began, the room fell silent. People listened intently, their eyes closed, feeling each note as it rippled through the air. By the end, there was no talking, just a quiet appreciation that lingered. He realized that the piano had the power to transcend ordinary communication, could inspire, comfort, and move people without a single word. As he continued, he noticed how music could convey things that were difficult to express otherwise. Joy, sorrow, hope, longing. All could be communicated through a careful combination of keys, rhythm, and timing. He began to appreciate the subtlety, how a single note could shift the emotional tone of an entire piece. The piano taught him patience and observation, reminding him that creating something meaningful often required attention to the smallest details. His talent grew, but he remained humble, recognizing that it was not just skill but sensitivity that made music impactful. He never forced the piano to produce certain sounds. Instead, he listened, letting the instrument guide him as much as he guided it. This partnership created music that felt organic, authentic, and alive. The more he played, the more he realized that music was not about perfection, but about honesty, presence, and connection. Soon, he began performing at small community events, where people who had never seen him play were moved by his music. The responses amazed him. Applause, smiles, and sometimes quiet tears. He understood that the piano, once a forgotten object in the corner of a room, had become a source of inspiration and joy for others. What had seemed like a simple curiosity had grown into something powerful, a gift he could share with the world. Through these experiences, he also learned to embrace vulnerability. Playing in front of others was different from playing in solitude. Mistakes might happen, and the pressure could be intense, but each performance taught him resilience. He discovered that imperfection could add character, and that sincerity in expression mattered more than flawless execution. Music was a dialogue, not a display, and the connection it created was more important than the technical details. He continued exploring, pushing the boundaries of what he could express. Improvisation became a favorite method, allowing him to react in real time to emotions, events, or inspiration. Each session was unique, each melody born from that moment alone. He realized that music could capture time and emotion in ways that were fleeting yet eternal, ephemeral yet deeply resonant. It was a powerful lesson in presence and mindfulness. The piano became a companion through life's highs and lows. When he felt joy, he played exuberant, lively pieces that seemed to dance through the air. When sadness crept in, he created melodies that were soft and reflective, offering comfort to himself and, unknowingly, to those who heard. The act of playing became a form of meditation, a practice that aligned his emotions with his creativity. It was as much about internal discovery as external performance. Over time, he also began to mentor others, showing young enthusiasts the magic of the piano. He encouraged them to experiment, to explore without fear of mistakes, and to listen carefully to both the instrument and themselves. He emphasized that music was not only about technique but about feeling, imagination, and courage. By sharing his experience, he helped others uncover their own potential, continuing the cycle of inspiration that had first drawn him to the piano. His family and friends often reflected on how far he had come. The piano that had once been an object of caution and warning had transformed into a source of pride, wonder, and connection. They had seen the journey from hesitant curiosity to confident, expressive mastery. Each performance reinforced the realization that sometimes the things people are told to avoid may hold the greatest opportunities for growth and discovery. As the years passed, he composed pieces that were remembered long after he played them. Each composition told a story, preserved a moment, and conveyed emotions that lingered. His music continued to touch lives, both in intimate gatherings and in broader audiences. He understood that the true magic was not just in the notes or the instrument, but in the courage to explore, the patience to learn, and the heart to express honestly. Looking back, he often thought of that first hesitant touch, the moment when curiosity overcame caution. He realized that it was that small step, that act of daring to connect with the unknown, that had set everything into motion. The warnings had not been malicious, they had simply been born from care, but the choice to engage, to explore, and to trust himself had opened a door to discovery, wonder, and transformation. The piano remained a central part of his life, not as a tool of fame or recognition, but as a partner in creation and a source of joy. It had taught him patience, confidence, emotional intelligence, and the value of persistence. It had shown him that true magic often lies in the ordinary, waiting to be revealed by someone willing to take a risk. In the end, the story of the piano and the boy who dared to touch it became a story about curiosity, courage, and the power of discovery. It was a reminder that what others may see as forbidden or insignificant may, in fact, hold the potential to unlock something extraordinary. The piano had been the beginning, the medium, and the teacher, and in the hands of someone willing to listen and explore, it had produced pure magic.